move into this because the Supreme Court did the presidential immunity, and they just made it up. They made up a law, which they're not supposed to do, but they did. So now the president's pretty much effectively immune while they're in office, right? Well, the Supreme Court, who's involved in that, you've got John Roberts, who we know has taken some bribes. Clarence Thomas has taken a ton of bribes. Alito's taken some bribes. We know of a couple of the others, the three that Trump appointed. All three were, the American Bar Association said, were not qualified to even be judges, let alone Supreme Court justices. Right? And they all lied in their confirmation hearings. Right? And they all said, "No, we're not going to overturn Roe," and they did overturn Roe, and they based it off of two legal arguments that predated the United States. One was from the 1300s, from the Dark Ages. The other was from a guy who was a judge in the Americas before it was the United States, and other than banning contraceptives and abortion in the little town he was the judge in, his other claim to fame was he burned a bunch of girls to the stake for witchcraft. And that was how they did Roe. So the Supreme Court's just making shit up. And they are totally off the rail, and they're completely bought by these billionaires in big business. So Biden finally stepped up, and I know the Democrats are talking about impeaching. It's not going to go anywhere, but it does do something now, and it puts them on notice, and it puts pressure on Roberts to start doing something. Because there's no ethical standards in the Supreme Court. Because they have to set their own, and they don't. So they can take bribes, and it's totally fine. Right? So Biden is jumping.
I guess the assumption, and you know what the first three letters of assumption are.
Right.
The assumption, I think, was always that clearly, whether somewhat liberal or somewhat conservative, anybody that would make it as far as getting confirmed for the Supreme Court is going to behave in a way that has a certain level of ethics. Clearly, that's just how these people would be. One would think, right? Like, in all fairness, one would think. However, clearly that's not what's happening.
No, what happened, when they wrote the Constitution, you couldn't anticipate everything. And the nice thing about the Constitution that was unique is you can change it. And it gives a lot of flexibility. The other nice thing about it is it's all based on mistrust. Because you got to remember, all these guys were in the revolution for different reasons. A lot of them did it because they wanted land or money. And none of these guys trusted each other at all. Right? That's why you have the separation of powers in government. So they're always looking over each other's shoulders. The concept was, though, so the Senate would appoint Supreme Court justices, but the president would have to nominate them first. So you'd have competing people picking this person, right? What they didn't anticipate was you'd get a party system where it's only two parties, and the Republicans would get power, and they would all coalesce together and pick the person they knew was corrupt and would do whatever they wanted. They couldn't have anticipated that. Their thought process was it's got to go through enough steps that there's no way they're going to pick somebody who's that corrupt and power hungry. But when you have a whole party that's in control and they have the presidency and they have the Senate and they're all working together in lockstep, then yeah, that's what you get. Right? So, and you got to remember the three that Trump picked were all they were all picked by the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative organization. They're also, the Heritage Foundation, just so you guys know, also behind Project 2025. This is part of their all spiel for decades now to basically make America into a monarchy. A Christian white nationalist monarchy. We're going to go into this article where Biden's actually doing something about the Supreme Court, and hopefully the Democrats will follow suit. So, basically, it just says Biden's backing major Supreme Court reforms. Here's what they would do. And it goes into it, but essentially what he's talking about is the three main things he wants to do is create an ethics reform. So there's ethics rules they have to follow. He also wants to set term limits, which I think is a great idea. And the other thing he wants to do is pass a law in that repeals the presidential immunity. Okay, none of this is going to pass because the Republicans still have one vote majority in the House, so they're going to shoot all this down because they don't want a Supreme Court that is bound by rules of conduct. And they want the non-presidential immunity thing because they don't want their candidate
I
to
got
be.
nothing to add to that.
Yeah, but it should tell you everything you need to know about the parties. So the one party, the Democrats, has the House and the Senate, or the Senate and the presidency. The Republicans have the House, and now they have the Supreme Court, which nobody should have the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court should be unbiased, but they have the Supreme Court, very conservative. I mean, like ridiculously, conservative. But they don't want to give up any of that power. But now you have a president who the Supreme Court has just said is immune. And what is he trying to do? He's trying to get rid of this immunity. So it should tell you everything you need to know right there, just by what we're looking at. If I said, Lacey, you have complete immunity. You can rob banks, murder people, do whatever you want, and nobody can stop you. And then Lacey turned around and said, I don't think that's right. I don't think anybody should have immunity. That would tell you a lot about Lacey's character. Because most people would be like, really?
Really? Cool.
I'm gonna go rob a bank.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go murder that person I don't like because I can get away with it now. I mean, that just tells you everything you need to know. You have the one party that just won't let go of power, and the other party sit there and go, no, we shouldn't even have this power. Even though you gave it to us. Now, it's, like I said, it's not going to go anywhere because of the House, but that's the point is, depending on how the election goes, if it looks like the Democrats take the House, it looks like they will. Can they hold on to the Senate? Maybe, maybe not. And if Kamala Harris wins and she becomes president, now she's got a roadmap for Supreme Court reform. And term limits, I think, is a no-brainer. You shouldn't be able to serve for life. Nobody should.
I mean, I can't think of anything you're appointed to do for life. Like, for life?
Well, I mean, the original thought was, well, appoint them for life, that way they can't be manipulated by either side. There's no way you could really bribe or blackmail them because they have that job for life. Well, they didn't anticipate the kind of wealth and affluence we'd have in this country in the future.
Right. I'm sure they were thinking about it in terms of you can't make them fear for their job.
Right.
In order to sway them in one direction or another, but now they can take these bribes and whatever, right, left, and sideways, and not ever worry about losing their job. So, they were having some insight on one side, but not anticipating the other way it could go.
Right, and they also didn't anticipate that a president would nominate somebody and the Senate would confirm somebody that was corrupt. They didn't anticipate that because they didn't anticipate that a president and the Senate would ever fully be aligned because they're supposed to be at odds. So
right.
They just didn't anticipate it. But that's the problems we're facing today is things that just weren't anticipated. They didn't anticipate that kind of just immorality and corruption. And those guys didn't trust each other. They were corrupt and immoral too, but they set it up in a way that made sense back then, but nowadays, not so much. Not when you've got a bunch of ideologues in like a cult, like the Trump cult or the conservative Christian cults or whatnot. So, at least it's a roadmap for something to do going forward. Because I would like to see that. I'd like to also see, I think originally the Supreme Court was only like 3 or 5 people, something like that. It wasn't very many. And then it eventually became, like 7 and then 9 when there were 9 circuit courts. But that was a century ago. Now we have 13 circuit courts. I think there should be 13 justices. And I think they shouldn't serve more than a decade. And then they need to be replaced. I think that would solve a lot of this. Because now a president can appoint somebody in their 40s, and that means for the next 40 years that person's sitting on the bench making decisions that affect all of our lives with pretty much carte blanche. So
Yeah.
if you get an ideologue in that, or somebody who's a cultist or a right wing nutbag, that means we got to deal with the rest of us. The entire country has to deal with that. 300 plus million of us. So yeah, we really need to do something to rein in the Supreme Court. So I'm glad they're doing something. It's not going to go anywhere for now, but it gives you a sense of where the Democrats are going to go in the future if they win. And it gives you a really good sense of where the Republicans are going to go in the future if they win, which is even further towards the corruption, further towards the right.